Well, good morning, friends. We're going to look for a few moments at 1 Kings chapter 19 in the Old Testament. It's also going to be up on the screen for us. 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to look at verses 1 to 8 together. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some baked bread over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank, and strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. May God bless the reading of his word this morning. Pastor told a story of a man in his congregation who had lost literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. He owed everybody. And one day the pastor asked him, "How in the world are you even surviving? How can you smile? How can you be enthusiastic about Jesus and about life when you're just going through all kinds of problems?" And the man said, "Well, next time you come to my house, I will show you. I'll show you how." The pastor said that he was curious, so not long after that, he went to his house. He said, "I told you I would show you the thing that gives me strength." And they went into his den, and there was a painting. It was a simple painting of a Bible experience we call Daniel in the lion's den. It was a beautiful painting. There was Daniel standing there among ferocious-looking lions. These were not sleeping, slumbering lions. These were lions whose teeth were bared and whose claws were exposed. You could tell that they were threatening to hurt Daniel. There was a shaft of light that seemed to be falling down from the roof of that cave in which Daniel and those lions were being kept. A man said to his pastor, "Look at Daniel's eyes." And the pastor looked closely at the eyes of Daniel, and Daniel was looking up at the light. And the man said to him, "The thing that gives me strength in the midst of my troubles is this: Daniel's not looking at the lions. He's looking at the light." So when you get surrounded with lots of adversity, when you get surrounded by a lot of problems, don't focus on the lions. Focus on the light. That's God's prescription for depression. So we're continuing our look at the 5 W's, and we're at when. And I came up with the question, when does God answer us? In our passage, Elijah the prophet has just come off a victory for God. God single-handedly used Elijah to bring down the prophets of Baal in a contest. Whose God would answer their prayer? But coming off of that victory, Queen Jezebel threatens Elijah's life for executing her false prophets. And it scares Elijah. Verse 3 says that he was afraid and ran for his life. Now, it seems to me such a strange moment, after such a high, seeing how God worked in that situation prior to this, to see him come down with a crash and forget that God was just there. Verse 4 says, "While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. 'I have had enough, Lord,' he said. 'Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors.'" So, for whatever reason, he ends up in a depression, and it's real, because he's at the point that he wants to give up. For whatever reason, Elijah feels like a failure. He was asking God to take his life. And maybe in that moment, Elijah just planned to let his life waste away there under the shelter and shade of that broom tree. Maybe he figured he'd fall asleep and never wake up. Now, we all experience overwhelming moments in our lives where the grief and the fear feel so real. It pushes us into the darkest of places. We feel like throwing in the towel, so to speak, and giving it all up. Some just want to give up their lives and leave all of this behind. We think we're alone in this fight. We cry out looking for God to answer us. But what we learn from Elijah is that God doesn't always answer the way we expect. Elijah runs off alone. He left his servant behind, which I think was a mistake. But that's what we tend to do, isn't it? We don't want people to see us at our weakest or our most broken. But the reality is that God sees all of that, what we experience. Take a look at how God responds to Elijah's prayer. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. God's answer comes with being with Elijah. The only words God says is to get up and eat. His response comes by way of watching over Elijah. He responded with rest and replenishment. God fed Elijah twice. And in the second time, he says, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." God heard what Elijah said and didn't say in his prayer. God knew the weight Elijah was carrying, and God wanted Elijah to know that he wasn't alone in this. We think we're alone. We as I say, we run away from people to be alone. But we're not. God is present with us even in our pain. David wrote in Psalm 34, he said, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Verses 17 and 18. We aren't alone even when we experience loss or disappointment. Remember, God understands how we're made, and He is there to bring comfort. His presence wraps around us as a comfort, reminding us that we're valued and loved. And Jesus told his followers, he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Jesus offers a rest for our exhausted hearts. We can find relief in his comfort, resting assured that he cares for all our pains, granting us peace and healing. And when we're in the middle of a crisis, there's something to be said about resting our bodies and ensuring that we're physically able even. God's answer to Elijah was not to take his life. God's response in this moment was also not an audible answer to Elijah's prayer, but he responded by feeding Elijah. God also responded by empowering him. Verse 8 tells us that with the nourishment and rest Elijah was given, he then walks for 40 days and 40 nights to reach the mountain of God. Now, no one is absolutely sure where Mount Horeb was located. It could have been anywhere from 240 to 400 kilometers away from where Elijah was in that moment. Regardless, God empowers Elijah to be able to walk for 40 days straight. He didn't get the answer he was looking for. But man, did he get an answer. God restores Elijah and gives him the strength he needs to continue in his mission. God's not going to answer the prayer, "Take my life." But God will strengthen us to use our life for his will, his way. Terry Laughlin shares this story. Psalm 27:13 says, "I am still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." One sacrifice made by Bonnie K. Laughlin was the Christian homeschooling of her son Caleb. Bonnie saw that Caleb needed to develop his athletic skills. And when she tried to get Caleb involved in the Norton School athletic system, Kansas State school rules would not allow it. So while sitting on the couch in our living room, Caleb had to be told that he could not play football. We told him through prayer the Lord would change hearts and there would be a day he would play football for the Norton Blue Jays. By Caleb's 8th grade year, he was in the public school system, so he could develop his God-given athletic skills. By Caleb's high school football years, the Lord answered yes to Bonnie's prayer. He brought a Christian football coach into Caleb's life. And while Bonnie sacrificed homeschooling so Caleb could play football, Caleb sacrificed time and strength to be a football kicker. All through his high school years, winter, spring, summer, and fall, good weather or bad, Caleb would kick the football. He often kicked 100 times a day, all the time being blanketed in prayer. By the time he was a high school senior, Caleb received a scholarship to kick for a nationally rated college football team with the motto, "God, Family, Football," placed on their locker room wall. Caleb's high school coach was not ashamed of the Lord or prayer. Neither were the coaches and players of the college he received a scholarship from. 8 years before Caleb's scholarship offer, Bonnie had been diagnosed with an astrocytoma, brain cancer. It normally takes the life of its victims within 18 months. The Lord was gracious. He enabled Bonnie to live long enough to see him bring Christian coaches and players into Caleb's life. The Lord gave us opportunity after opportunity to remind Caleb of God's faithfulness to open doors for him to play football in this life. Out of 1 million senior high school football players, Only 30,000 go on to play college football. Bonnie saw her son receive a college football scholarship from one of the top-rated college football teams in the nation. She enjoyed the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Elijah goes on to have an experience on Mount Horeb where he's given a task by the God and renews his mission. As I mentioned earlier, God didn't answer the way Elijah wanted him to. Elijah was ready to end it all. But God's response was to be with him and renew his strength and renew his mission. Stressful and sometimes tragic situations can drive us to misplaced reactions. This passage about Elijah shows us the importance of viewing situations from God's perspective. God reminded Elijah that he had not left him and even met with him in his weakness. In our times of weakness, we need to remember that God is still there, even if it seems like he's silent. He is still active in our lives. Remember, too, that you're not alone in your situation. There is always someone who has gone through what we may be going through in the moment. Others in the church have likely experienced similar circumstances, and God has brought them through as well. There are also times that we ask of God and he does not seem to answer, but he gives us directions. God does know the troubles we carry, and he's there to help us in our time of need. It just may not always look like what we expect.